Hello everyone, this is Alex Cordobard and continuing with the basics of how to use Blender. In this tutorial we're going to be learning how to model. Modeling is the process of creating objects or characters which are later used in scenes or in animations. So in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you the basics of how to model, and hopefully by the end of this tutorial you'll be able to basically pick up what you learned and use it on your own projects and your own animations. Alright, so let's get started. Before we start learning how to model, I'm quickly going to put my mouse over the 3D view and hit Shift, Spacebar, and T to get that out of the way. Now if you go down here, you can see right here on this little panel that we are currently in a mode called Object Mode. In this mode, like you saw in the previous tutorial, you can grab, rotate, and scale your cube. Now this is great if you want to modify the object, the whole object, but let's say you want to modify only parts of it and change the way that your meshes look. In order to do that, just click on Object Mode and go into what's called Edit Mode. You will see that your cube turns orange with vertices on each corner of the cube. Now a shortcut for this is the Tab key, which will go in and out of Object and Edit Mode. So in Edit Mode, as I was saying, you can see that there are little dots on each corner of the cube. These are called vertices, and they're basically the endpoints of an edge. If you see right here, this one is an edge, and at each end of an edge are the little vertices. Now just like before in the last tutorial, you can hit G, R, and S to grab, rotate, or scale these vertices. Now the other modes of selection are, if you go down here, you can see that we're in Vertex Select mode. If you go to the next one, it's Edge Select. So now you are able to select the edges. And if you want to select multiple edges or vertices, you just right click on one and hold the Shift key and right click on the others, however many you want to select. And you can rotate, scale, and grab these edges. The third mode of manipulating your 3D object is called Face Select mode. If you go down here, you can see it right here, and just like the other ones, you can select multiple and grab and rotate them. Now a shortcut for this is Control Tab, and it will give you the same menu, which is very handy because when you're modeling you tend to want to not move away from your 3D model and go down here. So Control Tab is a very good shortcut to learn. Now just like this, if you select 4 vertices, you will see that it now changes into a face because you have selected those 4 vertices which encircle that face. So there's many ways of going around this. You could either go in Face Select mode and select the faces, or if you're in Edge Select mode and select all 4 of the edges encircling that face, it will select the face. Also, if you select multiple faces, edges, or vertices and you want to deselect them, you can either Shift right click on the ones you don't want and Shift right click to reselect them, or if you just want to deselect all of them, you could go ahead and hit the A key, which will deselect or select everything. This goes the same for Object Mode. If you're in Object Mode and hit the A key, it will select or deselect everything. Now back in Edit Mode, you can see that right now I'm in Face Mode, and if I wanted to, I could go to the top view, grab that face, and grab this, and just like in Object Mode, you can constrain these to the axes. So if I hit G to grab and Y, you can see that it stays on the Y-axis, or S to scale and X, And the same thing goes for object mode. To grab it and left click confirms it, and if you grab it and right click, it will snap back to the center. Now that you know a little bit of the basics of modeling, you will see that with a cube you are very limited. If you go into Vertex Select mode and select everything, you will see at the top right here these numbers displayed. It says VE 8 out of 8. That's the number of vertices that are in your cube. The first number is how many are selected. So if I select 1, it will be 1 out of 8. And the second number is how many total vertices are in your object. So you have 8 vertices, 12 edges, and 6 faces. With this, you can't really do much. You could make some weird shapes, but not something that's probably in the real world. In order to add more geometry and more vertices to your object, there are a couple ways of doing it. I will show you the ways that are used most often in Blender. And the first way to do it is select everything by hitting the A key, and then hit W, and that will bring up the Specials menu. The first one on the Specials menu is called Subdivide. If you left click on that, you will see that all the faces on my cube have been subdivided into 4. Now you can do this however many times you want. If you want, you can hit W, subdivide it again, and you will see that it will keep making subdivisions in your cube. And with those subdivisions, there are more and more vertices, faces, and edges. And this way you can start to create something and have more to play with. Another way of adding more vertices to your object is to use the loop cut tool. Loop cut is very important and it's used a lot in modeling, so it's important to know how to use it. But for now, I'm just going to show you it, and you can play around with it and see how it works for yourself. So if I hit Control R, you will see that a purple line appears. And if you move your mouse, you can select where to place this purple line. And if I select here and left click, you are now given the option to move the vertices that have been added to your mesh. So once you get a position you like, just left click and it will accept where it is and it will be part of the mesh. So loop cut basically cuts your cube all the way around and adds vertices and edges where it's needed. If you hit Control R and when you have the purple line, scroll the mouse wheel up, you will be able to add more loop cuts. You can add them in any direction you want as long as the purple line shows up, which means that you have a loop that's able to be placed. Or if you want a more precise number, you could hit Control R and type in a number such as 20, and you will get that exact amount. Now, loop cuts is one way, and then another way of adding more geometry is the Extrude tool. And just like the loop cut, this one is used very often. So if I go into face select mode by hitting Control Tab, selecting face, and select one of the faces, if I hit E, you will see that the face is extruding, and you move your mouse to select how far you want it. If you left click, it will position it, but unlike the other ones where you right click and it resets it, it does reset it, but I'll show you what I mean. If you hit E and right click to reset it, there is still the extrude here. It just went back to where it started. But if you hit G, you can see that it's still there. So make sure to not make the mistake of extruding it and then right clicking to undo it and thinking that it's not there. There will still be an extra face that is there that will result in bad renders. So make sure to undo it by hitting Control Z and then you'll see that it's gone. So with the Extrude tool, you can select multiple faces if you want, and hit E and extrude those. Left click to confirm and right click to bring it back to where it started, and then Control Z if you want to remove it. You can also do the same thing with edges. And this way is a really good way of adding edges and faces exactly where you want it. You can do this, and then you could add loop cuts. Also, another thing on subdividing, you can also, instead of selecting the whole mesh, you can select one face or multiple and hit W, subdivide, and it will just subdivide that face instead of the whole mesh. And now the last thing I'm going to show you on how to add more geometry to your object is copying the object. So if you select everything, or just part of it, but first I'll show you with everything, and hit Shift D, you will see that it duplicates it. So Shift D is a shortcut to copy an object, and you can constrain it. Once you copy it, it automatically goes to the grab tool. So you Shift D and it's grabbed, and you can hit Y to constrain it on the Y-axis and position it. Same thing goes for object mode. If you go in object mode and select this, you can hit Shift D and it will copy the object. But now they are two separate objects. Right now, this is one object, as you can see down here, cube, and this is a second, cube 001. If you hit Shift D when you're in edit mode, however, it will stay part of the same object. So make sure to remember that when you are copying objects around, and make sure you're either in edit or object mode, whichever one you want. Now that you know how to add more geometry and more vertices to your object, I want to show you that those shortcuts that we used for the loop cut and the extrusion are also found in the menus of Blender. If I hit Tab to go into edit mode, and then T to bring up the mesh tools, you can see here a variety of buttons for different functions, including the extrude, subdivide, loop cut, and duplicate options that we used. If you look underneath, you could see the shortcut key for it. Also, if you go down here to mesh, you can see extrude and duplicate. Now, it's a lot better to use shortcut keys whenever you can because it speeds up the process a lot. But remember that if you forget for any reason, or if you just want to, there's always the options in the menus of Blender. So just take a peek around and I'm sure you'll find them. Now also keep in mind that these options are shown when I'm in edit mode. If I go to object mode, you can see that it goes to object tools and I'm given a different list. Same with right here. Alright, going back to edit mode and closing this by hitting the T key, I will show you how to delete faces or remove unwanted geometry from your objects. So if I right click this face and hold shift and right click this one, I could either hit X or the delete key, and I'm given these options to delete either the vertices, edges, faces, and these ones over here. The three main ones are these three up here. So if I delete the vertices, you can see that it deletes those two faces, but it also deletes a lot more faces. The reason for that is that these two faces have vertices right here, and these ones also share the same vertices. So if I delete these faces, it also deletes these vertices, and then these faces can no longer be complete because it's missing the top vertices. I can hit X and delete the edges, which gives a different result, but also deletes faces around because they share the same vertex. And I can hit X and just select faces. Now, sorry for the scroll lock, my mouse wheel acts up sometimes. Now if you delete these two faces and you're past the point where you can hit Control Z to undo it, the way to fill up this gap again is by going to Vertex Mode, by Control Tab, or go down here, select this vertex and this one, hit F, and you will see that it fills in that space with an edge. Then hold Shift and right click these ones and hit F, and it will fill in that space with a face. And then you could go ahead and grab these four by Shift right clicking and hitting F and filling in that face. Now an easier way to do it, instead of grabbing all those vertices, is to have the space right here again, hit Control Tab and go to Edge Mode, select this edge and the one across, hit F, and this one and hit F. That way you have to do a lot less clicking. Now I'm going to show you how to delete loop cuts. So if you remember, we hit Control R and we could add loop cuts around the geometry, which is basically a line all the way around that loops back on itself. To delete these, you could select one by one, but the edges or the vertices, but it's kind of tedious this way. So if you have a nice edge loop, you could hit Alt, hold the Alt key and right click on an edge loop and it will select the whole edge loop. If you hold Alt and Shift, you can select multiple edge loops. Now to delete an edge loop, you could select the edge loop by Alt right clicking and hit X and vertices, and that deletes the edge loop. But this way of deleting is kind of destructive because now there's a big gap in your geometry, unless this is what you want. So a better way to do it, to just remove this edge loop, is to hit X, go down here and select Delete Edge Loop. And now you can see that the edge loop is deleted and it's filled in between the other two edge loops. You can delete multiple edge loops by just Shift right clicking, except that way doesn't work very good because it messes up the mesh. So a way to do it is going into Control Tab Vertex, and you could select and delete multiple ones, but they can't be right next to each other. Say you want to delete these two, it now turns into a face loop. So this way you can't delete the edge loops. But if you select every other loop and hit Delete Edge Loops, it will delete it. And you could also select faces. You could select face loops by going Control Tab and go into Face Selection Mode, hit Alt and right click, and you will select a face loop, which is basically two edge loops. And same thing as before, you can select multiple edge loops by Alt right clicking. Now, a different way of selecting however many faces or vertices you want is you can right click and tediously select every face or vertex you want, or if you have a lot of faces or vertices to select, hit the C key and you are given this circle, kind of like a paintbrush, and you could scroll your mouse wheel up or down to make it bigger or smaller, and then if you left click, hold and drag, you can drag over all the faces or the vertices that you want to select. Now if you want to deselect them, instead of left clicking and drag, just middle click and drag and it will deselect them. Another way of selecting things, if you need to select a lot, is hitting the B key. Hold the B key or just hit it once and then left click and drag over what you want to select. As you can see, when I hit B, I'm given these crosshairs, and if I left click and drag, it will select whatever is in the rectangle or the square. And those are different ways of adding and deleting things. So you could select however many you want and just delete those vertices. You can extrude, and for example, if you want to fill in this face right here, you could just hit 7 on the numpad to go into top view, and you could see that to fill in this face you would need a vertex here. So to do that, just select this one or this one and hit E to extrude, X to lock it on the X-axis, and then select the other 3 vertices and hit F, and it will fill in the face. So now that you know the basics of modeling, I want to do one last thing. I know this tutorial is a little bit long, but if you want to stick with me, then go ahead. I just want to do this last thing, and it's going to be modeling a simple wine glass just to get all the things that you learned in this tutorial and know them a little bit better by actually applying them to modeling something. So I'm going to go into object mode by hitting tab and then hit X and delete this cube that we had here. And now one more thing that's important to know how to do in Blender is how to add new objects into your scene. The way you do that is hit Shift A, and don't worry about any of these options here. The only one you're going to look at is Mesh, and here you can select different shapes that you can add. You can also go up here and add Mesh, and you have the same options. So I'm going to hit Shift A, Mesh, and Circle. Now if you hit T right after adding the circle, or F6, for now I'm going to hit T, you could see that right here it gives me options for how many vertices I want to add in the circle. So if I bring this down, you can see that my circle starts to have less and less vertices. This way you can make different shapes that you need. For now I'm going to leave it at 32 vertices. There's other options here that you can play with, such as filling the center of it like this. For now I'm not going to go too much into these. I just want you to know that they're there so you can mess around with them later. I'm going to hit the T key to close that. And now with my circle selected, I'm going to hit G and Z and bring it up. I'm going to go into front view by hitting 1 on my numpad. And now going into edit mode by hitting tab. With all the vertices selected, if they're not, just hit A. I'm going to extrude this by E and then Z to lock it on the Z axis. Now Control R to loop cut, and you could either scroll up 5 times or just hit 5 on the keyboard. And now I'm going to scale these down by Alt right clicking them. Scale them down or up based on how a wine glass is kind of formed. This isn't going to be an exact reference, but it'll be okay for this learning tutorial. So once you get something that you are okay with, we are going to select this bottom loop by Alt right clicking, hit Control 7 on your numpad to go underneath the wine glass on bottom view, and now hit E to extrude, and right after you extrude just right click and it will go back to where the other circle was, and now hit S to scale and bring it to about where you think a wine glass handle would be. Go back into front view, 1 on the numpad, and bring this down on the Z axis. Now hit E and then Z to extrude it on the Z axis. To make the base of the wine glass, we're just going to hit Control R to add a loop cut, left click, and then drag your mouse down and bring it about right here, depending on how thick you want the base. Now go into face select mode or you could just stay in vertex select mode and Alt Shift right click here on this other one so that you have these two edge loops selected, or go into face select mode and Alt right click and you will select this whole face loop. Now hit E to extrude and right click to cancel the movement. Now hit S, and you can see that right here we have a problem because we're scaling it up, but it's going kind of like down like this, and it's also way too big on the Z-axis. Now an easy way to do this is if you do not want it to scale on one of the axes, because right now if you scale it, it scales it on the X, Y, and Z. But if you only want it to scale on two of them, such as the X and the Y, but not the Z, you would hit S and then Shift Z to take the Z axis out of there. And you see that it doesn't scale it along the Z axis anymore. You could do the same with the other ones. If you hit Shift X, it will scale it along the Z and the Y. But for now, we're just going to hit S and Shift Z to keep it along the Y and the X. Scale it to about there. And now for the rim of the wine glass, we're going to go to the top, hit Control Tab and select Vertex. Alt right click the rim of the glass and hit E, right click, scale it down to about the rim of a wine glass, and left click. 1 to go into front view, and now we want to make the inside part of the wine glass. Now, to be able to see through this wine glass, all you have to do is either go down here and go from solid to wireframe, or hit the Z key, which will toggle back and forth from solid to wireframe. In wireframe, just with that ring still selected, hit E to extrude and Z, and just bring it down and scale it up and then extrude it along the Z axis again, and just extrude and scale. And then at the very bottom here, just hit F and it will create a face. Now you have a very simple wine glass, and it's a little bit choppy right now, so a way to make it smoother is hitting the T key and going right here in object mode or edit mode. You will find this option shading and hit smooth, and now the wine glass is nice and smooth. It's still a little blocky, and the reason for that is because it only has a little bit of faces. It doesn't have enough faces for it to be smooth. So you could either have it flat or smooth. Now if you look right here, there's some ugly artifacts right here on the wine glass, and that is because the faces or the vertices of the wine glass are facing the wrong way. So an easy way to fix that is go in edit mode by tab and A to select everything, and then either hit Control N or go right here to the mesh tools, and under normals you'll find recalculate. So hit that and you can see that that automatically goes away. And now, without going into too much more into Blender, because I don't want to overwhelm you guys with this, I'm just going to hit Shift Tab to bring everything back up. And here in the Properties panel, I'm going to go here to the Modifiers. And these modifiers basically, they modify objects even further. I'll go into them more in other tutorials, but I'll just do one simple modifier that's used a lot in Blender. So click on this and add modifier and go to subdivision surface. And this, if you press Z to go in wireframe and toggle this on or off, you will see that it basically subdivides your mesh so that it has a lot more vertices and faces, which makes it smoother. You can put the view amount up one more so it's smoother. And now you will see that right here it kind of gradually goes to the base of the wine glass, and we don't want that. So the last thing we're going to do is go tab into edit mode, and right here you could select this button right here, the apply modifier to editing cage during edit mode so that you could see a little bit better, and just hit Control R to add an edge loop and bring an edge loop close to this one. And actually let's take that off so you can see exactly what happens a little bit more. Control R, you will see that now the gradient of it goes from this edge loop right here to this one, to this one, instead of it going from this one to this one all the way up here. So it's a smaller slope. We're going to do the same thing for this one up here. Control R and bring it up. And the last thing right here, since it has to go from this one to this one, it's kind of smoothened out and circled right here. So to make that more of a sharper edge right here instead of a circle, just hit Control R and add an edge loop up there and one down here. So now you have a simple wine glass. It's not much, but hopefully this tutorial helped, and I will go into further detail about the subsurf modifier and all of that stuff that I didn't get to cover in this tutorial in another tutorial. So I hope this tutorial helped. Go ahead and have fun modeling whatever you want, and I'll see you in the next one.